Hello, everyone. Welcome to the third annual Rocky Mountain RMRRF Fest. My apologies, I could not make it this year, but I still wanted to provide you with my TED Talk, so to speak, about resin printing. So I thank you guys all for joining, for those who are in the audience and listening. But yeah, I wish I could be there with you, and it's kind of saddening to me. I absolutely love the Rocky Mountain RMRRF Fest, but hey, it is what it is, and hopefully I'll see you guys next year or at another convention of these sorts. So without further ado, let's get into resin printing. I am your host, AkumaMods, the resin printing god, as some others have deemed me fit. So I just wanted to talk a little bit about the basics of resin 3D printing. I have three main rules that I talk about when I do resin printing, or anybody that's getting into resin printing. I like to share these three tips, and these are pretty much the basics of resin printing, the life force. Without these three basic things, pretty much your printing experience is probably going to be very disappointing. So, first and foremost is exposure time. This is number one on my list always, because without it, you're either going to have a print or you're not going to have a print. But there's also some other things in between when we're talking about exposure time. So what exposure time is basically going to help you do is allow you to get the best accuracy and dimensions of your resin print. This is what's going to make the details pop or not pop, depending on what you're doing with it. So I see tons of people out there that are basically guesstimating. And I'm not saying that's wrong, but there's an easier way to deal with this instead of doing the guesstimation route. Because again, while you can guesstimate, oh, this resin may take 2 seconds, when in actuality it might take 3 seconds, and the print might print. But the problem that you're facing is that you're underexposing that print or overexposing. And what that's causing is it's the print may print, but your details are going to be missing there. And that's something that I see tons of people do, where the print looks good, because regardless of if you're overexposing or underexposing, your print is going to look far superior than pretty much any stock FDM printer that's out there. So I do always highly suggest, like I said, dialing in your exposure setting. Now, I use something called the Frozen XP Finder. It's pretty much my go-to for any time that I am resin printing. It is a super fast resin print. You print one singular square in the middle of the build plate, and that's it. It can take anywhere between, I don't know, 15 minutes to 40 minutes, depending on the printer that you're using. But it is super accurate. Pretty much, I spend my time and dial it in at 2.5 seconds. And your bottom exposure, you can basically play around with that. I don't really mess around with it too much unless I'm having adhesion issues with my build plate. That's really the only time that you should be messing with your bottom exposure, if you see like a print that's like this and it's kind of coming off the build plate a little bit. I've noticed a lot lately with the new build plates that are coming out from manufacturers that are like etched and everything to quote unquote perform better with adhesion, but yet it seems to be doing the opposite with it. You know, I don't really see a good happy medium there. It seems to be across the board that I personally don't think that it's any better than like a regular flat build plate. So that's just my 2 cents. Whether or not you guys have that type of experience, that's completely up to you and up to the user itself. So yeah, going back to the whole normal exposure times, these are very, very important because This can make or break a print, like I said, or lose the details. So if you're underexposing a little bit, what can happen is like, okay, let's say I have wrinkles on my forehead and I really want those details to pop, or, you know, like pitting in my skin. I really want that to shine through, especially if I'm a painter. I don't want to have to go back in there and try and, you know, make those little puck marks to have like my little pores showing or anything like that, or have to do some battle damage on it. You know, if the print is like that from the designer itself, we want to make sure that we're getting the best detail. So if you're underexposing, what'll happen is it'll wash through all those details. So you're actually losing a little bit of detail. Again, it's going to be very minuscule to most users because most of the users are coming from the FDM side, where things look good enough. Whereas resin, you can get super high detail. The opposite side of that is overexposing. Essentially, it's doing the same thing where it's blending everything together like this. So while you may have to have a section like this where, you know, all of these are separate, you know, overexposing might be a little bit together. And it looks good, again, to the untrained eye. But when you look at the actual design of the print and the physical print, you see there's some mismatches there. And that's where you really got to utilize the exposure calibration systems. There are some printers that have them designed in tuned with them. Like I have the Uniformation GK3. They have a RMRRF system, and that's pretty good. I personally, again, always go back to the Frozen XP Finder, because it takes a lot less time, it takes a lot less resin. It's just one little square. It's super easy, super fast. And once you start getting the hang of it, you pretty much already know, all right, I'm gonna set this to this, and then I can automatically gauge from there where I need to set my exposure time. So really, that is one of the major players in resin 3D printing. So if you guys are looking to get into resin printing, number one thing, if you're not using like the same manufacturer resin, you're going off and you're changing something else. You know, if you have an Anycubic printer or an Elegoo printer and you're not using their specific resins, it is best to dial in the exposure settings, because every single bottle, yes, every single bottle has different exposure times. And if you are going to be using somebody else's exposure time from if you're going to be using somebody else's exposure time from the internet, one of the things that you have to worry about is that everything is different. So here I have everything in my basement, right? So somebody else's exposure time that lives 2 blocks from me, and they have their stuff upstairs on a main floor, their exposure time might be different than mine because of all the different temperature fluctuations, the humidity, everything plays an effect in it. It will probably be minuscule, but it's still, again, best to do your exposure time. So moving along, the number 2 thing that I always have to say about resin printing is the orientation of which your model is printing in. So, for example, we'll just use this for a model right now, but essentially this is a flat piece. So we can print this flat on the build plate, just like this. That's perfectly fine for most instances, but there is a problem with resin printing when you're doing something like that. It is called elephant footing or flat footing, depending on who you're talking to. It's all the same thing, but essentially what it does is, because of the compression system that resin uses, essentially this, let's say this was supposed to be 3 millimeters thick, will now become 2.5 millimeters, if not 2 millimeters thick. It all depends on how your compression is on your first layers. And that also in tunes with the exposure time. How many layers are you doing on each exposure? So this is where you can play around with things like, especially if you're doing flexible items like the Cinderwing Dragons or Zal 3D, you know, stuff that has articulation. You can print those flat on a build plate, no problem. You just might have to play with your bottom exposure settings. That's where that kind of comes in. But going back into the whole print orientation, really the major thing that we see in resin printing is stuff that is supported. That is our major go-to thing, is supports. Okay, and you see that a lot just because we don't want to deal with the whole flat footing. There's no reason to really change many of the settings in the resin printer menu. You know, speed, calibration, thing like that. That's about the only thing that you should really be changing is the exposure calibration. Everything else should pretty much remain the same, unless you want to mess around and make the printer faster. I've done that in the past. I do have some profiles for some printers, older printers, that we basically sped up to improve the print time. So with that, the main thing that you're going to see with resin printers is the fact that a lot of stuff is supported and orientated on an angle. And the reason for that is because we don't ever want to support anything that is flat. We don't want supports coming off here and then our build plate essentially being the same type of thing. We don't want this like this. We want to have a system where it's angled like that. The reason for this angle is we basically want to have a place for the resin to drip off at. If you don't have that, then you will possibly have some failures. Now, I've seen some people get away with it, but the majority of people that are going to try it are going to have some failures. What happens is the resin actually pools on top of that print because essentially we're doing some suction force. So with the suction force and that liquid resin that's sitting on top of there, it essentially starts eating away at the supports and everything. And then you come up with a print that is just supports. And you'll be like, oh my God, what happened? What did I do? Well, that's the reason why we always angle our prints. Always make sure that you have something pointing to the bottom of the vat so it can go back into it. So it just makes it a lot less messy for you when you're taking the print off of the build plate. And B, this is just going to help you with the adhesion, promotion on the printer. It's going to have less suction on it, and ultimately it's going to have a place for all that liquid resin to run off of. So moving along, so number 3 on my resin guide is essentially support structures. Now, there's not really a good system for me to tell you, hey, this is going to work 100% of the time. The problem with resin printing is each and every print has their own support structure setup. So no two are going to be alike. I will say that some of them might work majority for things, but that's if you're printing, like, if you're printing miniatures, obviously we're going to be going with light supports. That pretty much works across the board, but that doesn't always work, because if you have 35 millimeter miniatures that you print consistently, those might work pretty good for light supports. But if you have something that's a 70 millimeter miniature and has a little bit more solid resin into it, let's say we have a solid base to keep the print from, you know, walking away essentially or tipping over easily. The thing is you're actually introducing more weight. So that light support might tear away from that because it doesn't have enough grip to grab that print. So you might have to add in some manual supports, and usually you would have to go with a medium support or heavy support depending on your choice. Really, that's where it boils down to, is this is all going to be user choice. It's going to be a trial and error type thing. Like I said, there's no tried and true way to say this is going to work 100% of the time. And now with me saying that, you might contradict me doing that or saying that, because yeah, there might be a print or a support setting that works completely for you. But the thing is what I'm trying to get at is a support that will remove easily, leave less markings, and just be easier to remove in general, okay? And then also have a successful print. So there's variables in there. So yeah, you can print everything on a heavy support. It is definitely not needed. You're probably doing more work than what you're needed on most of them. I will tell you, probably 9 times out of 10, I never use heavy supports. There's very, very rare times. Now, I do have some large 3D printers here that do very, very big prints. So at those times, we do call for some heavy supports, but it's very, very rare. I can probably count on one hand how many times I've used heavy supports in the 7 years that I've been resin printing now. So the general consensus of things is medium supports will work pretty much generally across the board. One major thing that I see a lot of people utilize is automatic supports. And I'm not saying they're bad, but they're not always right. It is always best practice to go back in and check. What you're essentially looking for is a floating effect. So let's say I have a print that's like this. I have an arm that has a drip point, essentially. It's kind of like this. Well, the thing is the support will probably do a support here and a support here. Now, you can change the angle of the supports on what they utilize in the settings. You can go ahead and do that. That's perfectly fine. But if you're someone who just utilizes regular supports or automatic supports, this is not going to get it on the first try. You're going to be wanting to go back in and check to see if there's any floating islands, essentially is what we call them in the resin printing community. Basically, you'll see a support here, but maybe not a support like in the middle here. So while this might work, there's a possibility of failure between my wrist and my hand because there's nothing supporting there. So we're going to go ahead and we're going to manually add in a singular support. I do this literally every single time because if I change the angle on the supports, I might have too much supports. And I know there's some people that are out there who are penny pinchers. They don't want to spend more than what they need to on a print. They have specifically said, this print is going to cost X amount. That is my budget. That's it. So for those type of people, you definitely want to utilize that system because, well, you're basing it off of a price point and you don't want to spend extra money on unneeded resin. So the more angle that you use, the more support that's going to be added. Again, that might be too much than what you want to spend on it. So that's why you want to go back in and do some manual editing. So that's pretty much it for my basics of resin printing, and we'll move along to the next slide here. So I'm going to talk about some resin myths that I see constantly posted on groups, forums, chats, you name it. People that I've talked to, even large creators that I talk to that are kind of misinformed, but I don't really blame anybody for getting misinformation. The internet has thousands, millions of people on it on a daily, on a minutely basis. So everybody has their own opinions, but I just want to kind of inform you of some things that are said on the internet that may not necessarily be true. One of the major things that I see is when people have failures with their resin printers, stuff sticks to their vat, specifically is when I see this, is people suggest things like Rain-X, PTFE, things of that nature to coat your vat, your FEP film, to allow the adhesion to not stick, okay? Obviously, these are non-stick products, but the problem that you are doing with this items that you're putting onto your FEP is it's not doing anything. So for most of the time, people don't understand that FEP film is literally chemically resistant to things. So that means nothing sticks to it, nothing does anything. Now, the reason why resin sticks to it is because it's a compression system. So it's more or less, it's compressing that together. So that's why we see things like failures like that, where it sticks to the bottom of the vat, because it's supposed to do that. It has a glass sheet underneath it or an LCD, whatever, and it compresses it together. So it's actually compressing it. It's not actually sticking to the FEP itself. It compresses it. So it's a different type of system. So a lot of people think that PTFE tube or Rain-X, because it is a repellent, will work with that. Well, it might. Okay, now I don't have the data to back this up or anything, but in my experience, This is more or less like a myth, right? And the reason why I say that is because there's no data to back up that it works. There's no data to back up that it does work, right? It's just kind of like hearsay. One person said it, another person said it, two other people said it, so on and so forth, and it just spread like wildfire. So I'm not saying that it doesn't work, but it just doesn't seem to be correct. Because, like I said, FAP is chemically resistant. So that means that nothing sticks to it. Like, that is what it's used for. It is used to be something that is not for PTFE, which most of like Rain-X and PTFE lube, that's essentially what they make up, is PTFE. So it's made to be chemically resistant beyond that. So just thinking logically about this, that makes sense that it doesn't technically work. You know, it is just something that was drummed up by one person. They seem to have good adhesion after that. But it just, again, there's no data to back it up. So use it or not, that's completely up to you. But in my experience, it doesn't do anything but maybe thin out your resin a little bit. And in theory, thinking about it, you know, we use a UV light system. So even if you coated the FEP, the heat from the UV light source is literally going to burn off anything that's on that FEP automatically. So by the first or second layer, it's already gone. So that's another thing. It's kind of like the data's there, but it's not truly there. So it's kind of, like I said, it's more of a hearsay type thing. So I can't really say that it is or isn't type of a setup or anything like that. But hey, you know, again, you guys use what you need to use. I personally don't think it works. It's not something that I see physically working for anybody. So use it or not. Another thing that I hear about all the time is resin toxic. Now, this is kind of a weighted question, or weighted answer, I guess you can even call it as well, because while some resins are very toxic, most of the resins that people use are fairly toxic. Now, toxic is a broad range. If resin was truly toxic, you would see a toxic marking on resin bottles and resin packaging. This would put them in a whole other field that most of the time you will not be able to normally get them without proper licensing. So it's kind of like, yeah, it's a little bit true, but not. So it's toxic more or less in the way that it is a skin irritant. So it's toxic on certain levels. So just like seafood, peanuts, food allergies, right? Resin can be an allergen to some users. So you really have to be careful with how you use that. Obviously, proper PPE is the best case scenario in this case to protect yourself from resin and resin residue, anything that has to do with resin. So wearing gloves, wearing glasses, even a respirator if you feel you need to. But I'll be completely honest. Again, I've been doing this for 7 years. Now, I've had some accidents happen. Everybody has them happen. It happens all the time. I had a problem where I was moving some denatured alcohol that I thankfully had just freshly screened and filtered out, and it slipped out of my hands and went up in my face. You guys probably seen that video before. Yeah, it's pretty bad stuff. The denatured alcohol is probably way worse than the resin residue that was left in there, because denatured alcohol tends to dry up any type of moisture, any type of stuff on your skin. It basically dries up, right? That's what it's supposed to do. And so when I got it in my eyes, obviously my tear ducts were super dry for a couple hours. Now, thankfully, in the basement here that I work out of, I have a wash station right next to my washer and dryer. Everybody does, right? So thankfully, that thing fills up very quickly. I was able to wash out my eyes about 3 or 4 times. And then I ended up going to the emergency room just to be on the safe side. I knew I did my due diligence and I cleaned out properly, but I wanted to make sure that I got checked out. Everything obviously is perfectly fine. That has been, what, 2 or 3 years now since that happened. And it actually happened on a live stream here. Who knows, maybe somebody in the audience here had witnessed it while I was doing the live stream. But yeah, you know, it happens. So again, just proper PPE and, you know, I will not make that mistake again. Everything pretty much stays stagnant where they are. So I probably won't have to deal with that ever again unless, you know, something happens where it's a freak accident where my desk decides to collapse for some reason, which I really hope it doesn't, because that's what makes a desk a desk. And it's made to hold up X amount, and you know, I make sure that I have a strong enough desk. So anyway, with the whole resin toxicity thing, like I said, it's more of an irritant. So again, just like you know, people with food allergies, some people are allergic to it, some people aren't. This is basically the same thing with resin. Some people are allergic to resin as a skin irritant, so it'll cause dryness, scratchiness, kind of like like as if somebody just scratched you. You know, if you've ever had like a puppy or a cat or something and they scratched you before, and it's like if somebody blew on it, you know, you would feel that it hurts, right? That's what it kind of feels like. I know from experience. I've had resin drip on my skin. It happens, you know, even with you using PPE, it's going to get on your skin sometimes. It happens. You know, you remove a support and it ends up flying up and it hits you in the arm. It's not the end of the world, okay? It's not. It's going to cause some irritant for some people. Most of the people, it's not going to do anything. So you just wash it off with some warm water. You can put some rubbing alcohol on there and it'll wash it right off. That's perfectly fine. Do your due diligence and just make sure that you wash it before you go outside, because when you go outside, that's when the bad things happen. You can get third-degree burns instantly if you walk out there and any resin is on your skin. I've seen somebody where they got it on their clothes. They didn't realize they were moving their printer farm, actually. They moved a printer, spilled all over the front of them. They walked outside and instant third-degree burns all over the front of their body. You guys have probably seen that story a couple of years back. Absolutely a disaster to happen. So again, it's a freak accident. The user didn't understand. It happens, you know? So it is what it is. But all in all, I've done some testing with the VOC, because that's the major thing that everybody seems to focus on, is the volatile gases that are outputted by resin. And I will tell you that pretty much all the resins that most people are going to use from Amazon, you know, and this is like your standard resin, your ABS resin, the worst of all, water washable resin, you know, anything like that. Those are like the 3 main resins that you see on Amazon that people use. And now there's even a tough, I would say. Out of all of those, I would say they are less toxic VOC than even some PLA filament. And I've done this with a VOC meter, and I measured it, and it was like, so the normal VOCs that you would intake on a daily basis is like somewhere around like 500. I forget the exact measurement on it, but anything between 0 and 500 is good, essentially. That means your air quality is good, everything is good, you're in perfectly good health. Anything beyond that, it obviously is medium, and then anything beyond 1,000, it's pretty bad for you. Now, I will tell you that the only thing that's really like majorly bad, besides the specialty resins, is my wash station. My wash station is probably the most volatile thing that I have here in my entire setup. When I take the lid off of that thing and I have my VOC meter, instant skyrocket. It's crazy. It's insane how high that thing goes. I've tested some of these standard resins, the ABS resins, and they pretty much come in a little bit under most FDM PLA filaments that I've used. Yeah, you heard that right. In terms of VOCs, they don't off-put much more than maybe half of what a PLA does. So that's just absolutely insane to me. Totally mind-blowing. Like, I couldn't believe the results that I was getting off of this. Now, that doesn't mean that you can't use protection to help you out. For me, I don't have anything filtered outside. I have a recirculating system. So I have multiple air filters that are in here. They're, about 3 feet tall, and they recirculate this area. I have 2 of them, actually. And each one pretty much recirculates the air within 2 hours. So 2 of them pretty much recirculates all of the air in here within 1 hour. Now, again, going back to beyond standard resins, there are some resins out there that are super volatile for you. Some of the ones are like the flexible resins. Because of the additives to make it flexible, it's very, very volatile. I don't really know the name off the top of my head, but it's an additive specifically in flexible resins that make those the worst out of all of them. So if you are printing any type of flexible resins, please do not be in the room, do not be anywhere. If you're in a house, make sure that you have air filtration literally right next to it, because it is going to be bad. It's like, if anybody used super glue before and they've opened it up and, used a good amount of it. Let's say you spilled super glue right next to you, like it irritates your eyes and everything like that. That is a major, major thing that I see with a lot of people that use super glue. And that's essentially what it does, but it's consistently. It's the same type of thing, and it is so bad. So if I'm going to use some flexible resins here, I know I'm leaving the room when I print with that stuff, because even with my air filtration, and I have some pretty good air filters in here, they just do not do anything. Like, even if I try to vent that outside, the gases it off-puts regardless is just so bad. It's not going to help regardless of what you're doing, unless you have it like super enclosed and you have a giant fan right above it. That's the only time I can see you even possibly not getting any of that type of remnants from that resin. It is just insanely crazy with it. So just be aware that most of the resins that you guys are using are pretty good for you. Again, skin irritant, eye irritant, obviously that's a normal thing. So out of anything, wear some gloves, wear some eye protection if you're going to be doing anything. And again, if you're really concerned about it, use an air filter if you want to, a mask air filter. I think that's a little bit insane to do that. But again, that's going to boil down to what type of resins you're going to be utilizing, because, you know what, it's better to be safe than sorry, really. Again, in my user experience, I think that's a little extreme. But again, you do you, and I can't tell you what you should or shouldn't do. I'm just giving you my personal experience, my advice, and whether you take it or not, use it, that's completely up to you. So we already kind of touched on ventilation. Again, obviously, it's always best to ventilate outside with resin printing. Again, I've tested this, and the VOCs aren't as bad as what everybody makes it out to be. I've even talked to some resin manufacturers, and it seems to be the consensus of resin gets a bad rap because people say that it's so bad, and it's not as bad as everybody thinks. Now, if we were talking a couple years back, that might be a different story, okay? Resin has drastically advanced within the last, I'd say, even 2 years, where things have become safer. There's even Form Labs out there that has their new Creator Series resin that is less toxic than, the typical Chinese resins that most of us use. There's even some, basically the best resins out there to be safe with is going to be the Formlabs Creator Series, 3D Resin Solutions, or 3DRS, and then there's Monocular 3D. Those are the three main manufacturers that are not Chinese that basically have the best resins out there for safety, essentially. Now, again, resin is still toxic on some levels, according to, the chemical research, but it's not going to be as bad as like the Chinese resins, because we're starting to see a lot of the Chinese resins kind of hiding some of the facts that they should be putting in their resins. And I'm not going to name any names, but there's quite a few out there that just don't put on all of the information that they should be doing. And the problem is there's not any requirements to do that. And that's really the major thing that we see. I will say that the best one that provides the most information that we've seen is Frozen 3D. They have all their technical data sheets, all of their information about the resins and what's included in them. They have every single thing down pat. They are probably one of the most informative resin 3D printing companies for users. So if you're going to take any type of resin and utilize it and know what you're going to actually be using, Frozen 3D is probably the best one out of the non-American, non-Australian company that utilize resins. So I want to go and touch back with some resin safety. Now, obviously, we all know that resin is very messy. But there's some things that you can do to help you better your life with that. That is the one thing that I see everybody kind of get warded off of resin printing is like, yeah, but there's so much mess. I have 13 to 16 resin printers at any given time. Now, granted, I don't print with all of them at one time. It's usually like 4 to 5, and then I do 4 to 5, and so on. But I have pretty much a 3-foot work area space that I utilize. And I will tell you that I use 2 sheets of like paper towels when I do cleanup. 2 sheets. That's it. So there's some things that you can utilize to help better how you have a workflow. That is the major thing right there, is workflow. So when you're first resin printing, obviously your workflow is going to be absolutely disastrous. It is going to be a mess. I'm going to be straightforward with you, because you haven't figured out the formula of like, okay, I want to take this off, and then I want to make sure that I don't have a lot of resin drippage. How do I minimize all this? So there's lots of things that you can do to minimize this. And again, I do this, I had a large print here. I used 1 paper towel. That's it. One little thing that's like this big. Okay. And pretty much simple cleanup. Very, very straightforward. But before we talk about that, I want to just touch on the whole resin safety. Again, we basically talked about goggles, a respirator, gloves. You can even go as far as wearing an apron. Now, that is kind of like a 50-50 thing. Aprons are very good because obviously if you're wearing street clothes that you don't want to get muddied up or resined up, essentially, an apron is very, very good to have. Another thing, obviously, is clean air systems. You want to have some sort of a carbon filtration system. That's what your major thing is you want. Don't go with a HEPA system. HEPA only filters certain particles out. You want something that has carbon filter or active carbon filtering along with a HEPA. Those two together are going to make or break what you're doing in terms of smell and in terms of working. That's basically what you want to have. So make sure that when you're researching for filter systems that you look for those 2 specific things, but one more above the other, the carbon filtration system. That is a major, major thing. Obviously, UV lights, you want to make sure that you have a UV cure system. I have little miniature UV flashlights, and I use those for like resin welding. What is resin welding, you may ask? Resin welding is essentially when you have two separate parts and you need to put them together. Instead of using glue, you can take the same resin that you used to print this, the raw resin, and I usually use these little syringes. I bought like a box of 100 of them. They'll last you forever. You probably don't need that many, but essentially I use that, or you can use a paintbrush and just put it in a cup and just kind of brush it along, and you can resin weld the two parts together with the UV flashlight because you're flash curing it. And then obviously you put it in a cure box or set it outside in the sun, because that's essentially what a UV light is the sun, and it'll cure it 100% for you. So, and then you can sand it down and it literally looks like nothing even happened. There's no seams, no nothing. You can do this and fix parts. You can do all kinds of things with resin welding. It is really, really unique. I personally try and use some clear resin to resin weld parts together, because if I'm going to paint over it, I'm not going to see that. But the great thing about clear resin is that you can penetrate through deeper surfaces. So if I have something that's like a crack like this, I can put all the resin inside there, cure it, and the light will disperse throughout all of that clear resin and make it easier to cure. So completely up to you if you want to use that or not, but any resin will work just the same. So, but clear resin just makes it easier for me to see what I'm actually curing inside of that. So, obviously cleanup, paper towels is probably your best. You want to have a specific trash can that you have all your UV stuff. I have a larger UV light that I kind of shine on there after every time that I use it, just so I can clear it out. Or you can throw it outside in the sun and let it cure. That's perfectly fine. I've recently switched to like the blue shop towels, and those seem to work even better, because with regular paper towels, you tend to get the fibers that rip off and everything, and they kind of leave like a weird fiber coating on the resin prints. And so I don't want that anymore. So I switched over to those, and they've been great. They're a little bit more expensive, but they're worth it in the long run. So, and then obviously the big thing is disposal. So there's two things that we have to take into account with disposal here with resin printing. Number one is, like I said, your garbage with your resin and resin prints that are uncured. I take a UV flashlight and cure the entire thing, or again, like I said, set it outside. It'll be perfectly fine and it'll cure everything. You can also hit that with some denatured alcohol or IPA if you want to. And you know, kind of rinse it off a little bit so it'll kind of all pool down there and evaporate. So in talking about denatured alcohol and IPA, I personally use denatured alcohol. Some of you guys who use water washable resins, you're going to be using water. Now, that's one of the reasons why I'm not a big fan of water washable resins, is that the disposal for your resin wash, that is the major thing. That is like really the big make or break deal, breaker of everything, is how to properly dispose of that. Is the thing that I see the majority of the time is you set it in here and you can put a UV flashlight in there or set it outside. That is the easiest case scenario. Let it sit outside and it will cure all the resin. You can scrape all of the dried resin off there and then just toss it away. It is perfectly fine once it's cured, okay? When we're talking about water washable resin, that is a major problem. If you're trying to get rid of your wash, let's say I just want to get rid of the entire thing. If I were to set denatured alcohol, IPA, and water outside all together, let's say I used a gallon, right, of each of those. By the end of the first day, at least 70% of the denatured alcohol and IPA will be gone, evaporated, cured, whatever, okay? With water, that's going to probably be like maybe 5%. Maybe. That's a big maybe. 5% of that is going to be gone or evaporated, because water doesn't evaporate as fast as denatured alcohol and isopropyl alcohol. So that's where I really have like a major issue, is that it's a lot harder to get rid of water wash than it is denatured and IPA. And please, for the love of God, do not rinse anything off in the sink with resin prints. Don't, please do not. You're literally washing uncured chemicals down the sink. And that is very, very bad for the water supply. Please just don't do it. Even if you think you know what you're doing, don't do it. Don't do it. Please don't. Properly set it outside, let it cure, and then properly dispose of it. Do not do that, okay? And the same thing, don't just, take your stuff and just throw it into your plants or anything. Again, you're putting that back into the ground, and you're going to kill the grass. You're going to infect anything that's over there with the resin that's inside of there. So please just don't do it. Properly dispose of it. Talking about disposal of resin. Now, obviously, curing it is the easiest way. One of the major things is I see people ask about, oh, okay, I have a resin bottle. I have used up all the resin, but obviously there's some resin left in there. There's a couple things that you can do with this. You can stick a UV flashlight down there and cure the inside. Or an easier way is swish around some IPA or denatured alcohol inside of there. Just take it, close it up, and swish it back and forth, and it'll clean it out pretty easily, and you don't have to worry about it. Then cure the inside, and you can essentially recycle those bottles at your local chemical place, and that way you can get rid of it. Because I don't believe that most recyclers will take those type of bottles. I'll have to double check with that. I've never actually recycled anything like a normal recycling. So that's something you will probably have to call your local recycler about. But I don't really suggest it unless you know for sure everything is okay on that instance. So, but yeah, that's pretty much all I got, guys. Again, my apologies. I really wish I could be there with you and having so much fun. I miss all my people there. I miss all my followers. I miss just hanging out with everybody. And, I'll see you guys at the next one. Until next time, guys, happy printing.